Welcome to this explainer. When we think about the founding of the United States, our minds almost automatically go straight to the founding fathers, right? We picture guys in powdered wigs debating loudly in Independence Hall. But today, we're unpacking the other half of that story, the absolutely vital role of female agency in the early republic. We're talking about women as human beings demanding rights, doing incredible work, and commanding respect. It's a story of brilliant management, genius legal maneuvering, and a quest for rights that actually started well before the ink was even dry on the Constitution. So let's stop and think about this logistical reality for a second, because we rarely pause to consider it. While the men were locked away writing laws, who was actually sustaining the new nation's economy? Who kept the country running? It is so easy to focus on all that political theater in Philadelphia, but the sheer survival of the colonies depended on a completely different workforce holding down the fort. Section 1. The architects behind the scenes. Let's step out of the political spotlight for a minute. Women were literally the unsung pillars of the American Revolution. They were the vital economic forces keeping the colonies from outright collapse. While their husbands, brothers, and sons were out shaping political futures or fighting on the front lines, these women took on immense, grueling responsibilities. They were managing expansive farms, running local businesses, and keeping family states afloat during a literal war. Without their relentless labor, the economic infrastructure required to even support a revolution, it simply wouldn't have existed. Section 2. Abigail, the estate manager. Let's look at one of these brilliant managers, Abigail Adams. She's frequently relegated to the footnotes of history as just John Adams's wife, but her role was way more foundational to his success than we usually recognize. Her management of the Adams estate is what literally enabled John to leave home in the first place, because she cared for the children, ran the incredibly demanding farm operations, and handled every single family finance. John was completely freed up. He could focus on drafting laws, building political coalitions, and even traveling across the ocean to negotiate in France. Without her single-handedly sustaining that economic foundation, his extensive public service just wouldn't have been possible. Section 3. Remember the ladies. Now, this sheer financial autonomy gave Abigail the footing to boldly lobby for political rights. In 1776, she delivered a prophetic warning. In a now famous letter, she explicitly told John to remember the ladies. And she didn't just ask politely. She declared that women would actively foment a rebellion and refuse to be bound by laws in which they had absolutely no voice or representation. It was this fierce intellectual assertion of women's rights, happening right alongside the broader revolution against Britain. But John Adams' dismissive reply? Honestly, it's pretty telling. The very men fighting so passionately against British tyranny essentially laughed off her plea. John actually stated that men knew better than to repeal their masculine systems because he feared that doing so would empower what he called discontented tribes and lead to widespread chaos. It really reveals a surprisingly rigid gender hierarchy that even the most revolutionary thinkers of the day stubbornly clung to. So we have a fundamental clash of ideals here. You have Abigail demanding true representation and warning of rebellion against arbitrary power, directly juxtaposed against John, who was terrified of losing authority and fiercely defending those established masculine systems. It's a fascinating look at exactly where the founders drew a line on liberty, right? They wanted freedom for themselves, for sure, but were deeply hesitant to extend it to the very women sustaining their own households. Let's trace how this builds out historically. We go from Abigail's private plea in 1776 to a monumental legal shift just 5 years later. Abigail's demand set a really powerful theoretical stage, but the true test of these new revolutionary ideals was about to be forcefully challenged in the courts by someone far, far outside the halls of power. Section 4. The Massachusetts Constitution. By 1780, the focus shifted to creating a pioneering framework of freedom right in New England. Massachusetts adopted a new constitution, and John Adams heavily drafted this document. It created a groundbreaking blueprint that would actually inspire the United States Constitution itself just a few years later. Written by elected delegates, this was a massive leap forward for democratic governance and was the very first to be ratified directly by the voters. The whole idea was to legally codify the exact liberties the revolution was fighting for. But the true revolution lay in Article I. All men are born free and equal. Now, to the men who drafted this, it was largely viewed as a sweeping, general statement of moral truth. But words have power. And they had just inadvertently set a massive legal trap for the institution of slavery, a trap that someone was about to spring. Section 5. Mama Bett's Freedom Suit. While Abigail Adams lobbied from a position of relative privilege, a woman known then as Mum Bett thought from the most marginalized position possible. Mum Bett was enslaved in the Sheffield home of John Ashley, who was a prominent Massachusetts patriot. Despite enduring harsh mistreatment from her mistress and being entirely kept from formal education so she literally couldn't read or write, she possessed a fiercely brilliant and observant mind. She paid close attention to the political discussions swirling around the household, absorbing all that grand rhetoric of liberty that her enslavers were so fond of preaching. And her sharp intellect led to a visceral epiphany. While working, Mum Bett overheard the new 1780 Constitution being read aloud. When she heard that exact phrase, "All men are born free and equal," her mind made an immediate, undeniable connection. She thought, if all people are born free under this new supreme law of the state, how could she legally remain enslaved? She didn't just sit and ponder this. She took radical action. Mum Bett actually walked away from her enslaver's home, sought out a local Stockbridge attorney named Theodore Sedgwick, and aggressively sued for her freedom, using the brand new state constitution as her weapon. Think about that for a second. It was an incredibly bold move, challenging the very foundation of the local economy and social order in open court. In August 1781, a jury heard her case, and they agreed with her. They officially determined that the institution of slavery was entirely inconsistent with the state's new constitutional decree. By ruling in her favor, the court practically dismantled the legal status of slavery in Massachusetts. It was a staggering victory. We see an incredible dichotomy here, don't we? Men like John Adams created an abstract, theoretical framework of equality while still tolerating the existence of slavery in their daily lives. But it was a marginalized, enslaved woman who practically enforced those abstract rights, forcing the legal system to bend to the true, literal meaning of its own words. She took the founders' rhetoric and made it reality. By winning her suit, she completely dismantled her status as property. She claimed her humanity, took the name Elizabeth Freeman, and didn't wait around for politicians to politely grant her freedom. She seized it using their own newly minted laws. Her monumental courage established a precedent that would ultimately end slavery in the state. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. How often is the boldest application of our laws initiated by those completely excluded from writing them? From Abigail Adams demanding a political voice and single-handedly managing an estate, to Elizabeth Freeman securing her very freedom through the courts, the early republic wasn't just shaped by the men in Philadelphia. It was profoundly forged by female agency. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this truly incredible piece of history.